Hello and welcome to this Come to Jesus Daily devotional where we continue in our Christmas series based upon the Gospel of Luke. And today we simply see that John the Baptist is born to prepare the way for Jesus. And God continues to prepare people and often uses us to make a way for Jesus. Let's read from Luke 1:57 to 66. When it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbours and relatives heard that the Lord had shown her great mercy, and they shared her joy. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child. And they were going to name him after his father Zechariah, but his mother spoke up and said, "No, he's to be called John." They said to her, "There's no one among your relatives who has that name." Then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment he wrote, "His name is John." Immediately his mouth was opened. His tongue was set free, and he began to speak, praising God. All the relatives and neighbours were filled with awe. And throughout the hill country of Judea, people were talking about all these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, "What then is this child going to be?" For the Lord's hand was with him. There's a lot in there, isn't there? So many excellent things we could focus on. But firstly, I want us to notice that others heard and shared their joy. After the birth of John, we read how neighbours and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy, and they shared her joy. This is a great lesson to us about how we may be able to share what God has done in our lives with our friends and family. Do we prayerfully seek to share the gospel, but not just the gospel, but other ways that God has been working in our lives? Maybe God has brought healing or provision, encouragement, solace. There's so many ways that God is working. Could we gossip about this to our friends and families? Particularly over this Christmas period, as maybe we meet people and relatives that we haven't seen for a while. What could we gossip to them about how God has been working in good ways in our lives, that they may be able to share our joy? It's so important that we realise that our salvation and God's work are for our joy, but also for his glory among those outside of faith. We must not be ashamed of how God has saved and helped us. In fact, it may be the way that others come to share our joy. So firstly, others shared their joy. And secondly, he is called John. My second point, he's called John. In keeping with the law of God in Leviticus 12, they circumcised John and afterwards they named him. However, everyone was astonished when Elizabeth declared that the child would not be named Zechariah after the father or someone else in the family, but that he was to be called John after the direction of the angel Gabriel. I hope that we can see that Elizabeth and Zechariah are prepared to break the expectations of others and risk being offensive in order to obey God. After Zechariah confirms Elizabeth's name for John, his mouth is miraculously opened and he praises God. Luke wants us to see Zechariah's journey from unbelief to faith, worship, and obedience. His healing further adds to the glory of God, and we hear that all the neighbours were filled with awe. And throughout the hill country of Judea, people were asking about these things. It's good to know, isn't it, that as with Zechariah and Elizabeth, our disappointments and our mistakes in life can be turned around and used for the glory of God to help others to come to know and to praise him. So in response, verse 66 from our reading today is the main point of this section. And here we read, Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, "What then is this child going to be?" For the Lord's hand was with him. These friends and relatives and we ourselves are to ponder the promises regarding John as the one who will prepare the way for Jesus. And we are to treasure and ponder the opening of the Christmas story with all its rich narrative and divine promises. Today we simply see that John was born to prepare the way for Jesus, and God continues to prepare people and often uses us to make a way for Jesus. Like Zechariah and Elizabeth, let's play our part through faith and obedience. God bless you.